Jeff is with ICAD, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, which I suspect goes way beyond house demolitions in your fabulous work.
Yes, it does. Okay, well, it's good to be here, kind of. Seville is family already.
Jeff is a regular.
You know, and so in a way, this should have actually been a debriefing. You'd have heard Ruth and then go out to the tour, and then at the end, because what I want to talk about a little bit with you guys is where are we going with this conflict? I mean, once we're, once we see what the problems are, and the thing that I think the main message I think will come out of Ruth's tour and our analysis, we've written about it, we have tours about it and so on, because our analysis is really based on what's happening on the ground. It isn't just some academic kind of a thing. And that is that the two-state solution is gone. I mean, I don't, you know what? I don't even get pushback anymore on that. I remember days when I'd say there's an occupation and people would yell at me. Now, no, I'm good, thanks. Now I think it's pretty clear. I was in a secret meeting that isn't so secret anymore with the Cleveland Jewish Federation. And that's a big thing. The federations,
for you.
huh?
That's a big step for you.
Yeah, the federations are like the heart of the whole Israeli presence in the U.S. and the Hasbara, the PR, and everything else. It was a secret meeting. They agreed to meet with me on condition that I don't talk about the one-state solution. I don't talk about BDS. So I'm not sure what's left exactly. You know, the weather in Cleveland isn't so great. But it was a very important Jewish federation. And at one point, and there were 5 of these big guys from the federation there. And at one point I said, the two-state solution is gone. And 3 of them said, we know. So in the heart of the establishment, the Jewish establishment, they know that it's over. I think everybody knows it's over. Now the problem is, there's in a way 2 constituencies, and you guys correct me, the Palestinians here, if I'm misrepresenting, but this is my view. There's 2 constituencies that are having problems moving to the one state, which would seem to me the default. In other words, it seems to be almost a mathematical equation. Although I'm an anthropologist and we're not very good at math, but this is what it seems to me. There's 3 options. One is a two-state solution. And we've never been against the two-state solution. That's always been, actually, for many years, the plan of the Israeli peace movement. And in fact, the Palestinians for many years supported the PA still supports it, but you know, it had support among the Palestinians. It's not a fair and just solution, of course, as you know. The Palestinians will only get 22% of their homeland, but you know, the PLO accepted it in 1988, and it could have been made to work, I think. But Israel eliminated it. And this is the key point. You can't, again, blame the Arabs and blame the victims. It's Israel that consciously and deliberately, over decades, eliminated the two-state solution. When they were building settlements, when they're building the walls, when they're expropriating lands, when they're destroying the Palestinian economy, when they're doing everything they're doing to building a whole infrastructure of highways that incorporate the West Bank into Israel, in a way, they knew what they were doing. I mean, they knew that they were eliminating any possibility of a two-state solution. And in fact, I think Begin made that decision back in 1977 to eliminate a two-state solution. And Sharon was sort of the architect of that by creating these facts on the ground that Ruthie will talk about. But and I think in their mind, their idea was it doesn't matter. Palestinians are weak, they're fragmented, and we can fragment them more. And in the end, they'll accept whatever crumbs we throw them. They're not a side. The Palestinians, I don't think, have ever been a side from the Israeli point of view. Genuinely a people with rights that we have to negotiate with. That was never the case. As a matter of fact, in Uri Savir, S-A-V-I-R, who was the head of the foreign ministry under Rabin in Paris during the little time after Rabin's assassination when he was prime minister. He was the main negotiator in Oslo from 1993 till 2000 or so. No, until 1996, actually, from 93 to 96, those years. And then when Netanyahu was elected the first time, he stopped. But he was the main negotiator. And he wrote a book called The Process, which is very interesting. And one of the things he says in The Process is, as soon as the Declaration of Principles was signed in 1993, kind of behind the scenes with Arafat and Rabin in Paris, and Yossi Beilin was involved in all the secret things that undermined, of course, the Palestinians that were in Washington. But that whole thing, immediately, he says, the Israeli army came in and said to Rabin, you cannot have civilians negotiating this. This has to be an army issue. And the army basically took over. And Rabin felt bad. He writes in the book, he felt guilty about the fact that the army had kind of been cut out of the process at the beginning. It wasn't brought in, and the army was feeling very neglected. And he basically gave over the negotiations to the army. One of the chief negotiators was this guy Uzi Dayan, who's today in the Likud. So, you know, and he writes in the book, Uri Savir, that the army related to the Palestinians the way it always did. The Palestinians are these terrorists, they're these people the army doesn't talk to Palestinians. You manage Palestinians, you control Palestinians, you contain Palestinians, but you don't really talk with them. It's me, actually. And that became, from the very beginning, the tone of he said that it was over that. They signed the Declaration of Principles in September 93, and that was basically the end. Because once the army took over, it was the end of the whole thing. There was no possibility of, he said there were never, ever genuine negotiations. And of course, like Ruthie says, that goes on until today. And Israel really doesn't care because it has two big sources of support. One is Germany in Europe. Britain to a certain degree, but especially Germany, that keeps Europe under control. And I was just in Germany this last week, and a lot of the parliaments in Europe are voting now. The train has left the station, but now they're voting to recognize a Palestinian state. But the Germans will never do that, and Merkel said that. And second of all, the Congress of the United States. Not the administration, but Congress. And that controls the rest of the world, basically. So Israel feels as long as we have those two anchors, nobody can touch us. Nobody can sanction us. Nobody can touch us. We're home free. And the Palestinians know this. And so the Palestinians will either continue to live under occupation forever, or they'll settle for whatever crumbs, like Ruthie's saying, for these cantons within the settled block. 15% maybe of Palestine they'll get in little tiny cantons. So Israel was able to kind of go ahead with this whole project without really thinking about the implications of it or the consequences. So it eliminated the two-state solution. Miron Ben-Venishti, who's a famous Israeli historian, claims it was gone in the 1980s already. But, wherever you draw the line, everybody came to the conclusion at one point or another, it's pretty much, I think, agreed that that's not going to happen anymore. So so that means then, and this is the key, that we have today one state. There is one state. It's not a matter of should there be one state. Should we move to a one-state solution? Should we? No, there is one state here between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. There's one government, and I certainly wouldn't call the PA a government in any way. There's one government, the Israeli government. There's one army. There's one currency. You know, everybody uses shekels, and it's all controlled by the Bank of Israel. Even when Palestinians use dinars, it's controlled by the Bank of Israel. There's one highway system, there's one water system, there's one electrical system. I mean, Israel has de facto created one state. Now, whether it'll go after these elections, the next step, which is likely, in the next Area C, that remains open. But it doesn't matter in a way because it's one state today. Okay. Now, that one state that was created by Israel, and I go back to that every 2 sentences, because you make your bed, and now you have to lie in it. You can't expect to have a Jewish state, because Israel's going to go crying to everybody, but we have to be a Jewish state. But you can't, you could have been a Jewish state in a way. I mean, I'm not going to get into the internal Israeli dynamics, but let's say, in a way, you could have had a Jewish state if you had had the two-state solution. You gave that up. Now you can't have the whole country and control of where half your population is now Palestinian and claim to be a Jewish state. I mean, you destroyed, I mean, in a sense, the irony is the greatest anti-Zionist force of all was Sharon and successive Israeli governments. Okay, so you succeeded. You succeeded. You eliminated the two-state idea. There'll never be a Palestinian state. Okay, now what? So what we have today is an apartheid state. I mean, there is an apartheid. I'm not saying this provocatively. There is an apartheid state today. And it's Israel over Palestine. And the Palestinians are living in a Bantustan exactly like in South Africa. And apartheid, we've done a lot of work on this, and including I've been to South Africa. Apartheid is really defined by two elements. One is when one population separates itself from the others. That's what apart means. Apartheid means separateness. You separate, and then you create a regime of domination. Institutionalized domination. It isn't discrimination. It isn't like Jim Crow in the U.S. or discrimination against Asians in the UK. It's not. It's accepted. It's the way the system works. It's institutionalized. So you have once you have a separation and then a dominant society that creates a regime of domination, that's apartheid. And it doesn't matter if it's based on race or religion or ethnicity or nationalism or the color of your eyes. It doesn't matter. As long as you have separation and domination as a system, that's apartheid. So there is an apartheid regime. Okay. That, I would hope and I would expect, is unacceptable to everybody. It has to be, I mean, I don't even know people on the right that could accept apartheid in the world. I mean, there are some, but it's a very hard thing to accept after Nelson Mandela and South Africa. So that means then that our task, it seems to me, is clear. It's crystal clear to me. We have to work for one state that's democratic with equal rights for everybody. Which shouldn't be such a foreign concept to Americans, Canadians, British people. Wow, a democracy of equal rights? What an interesting idea. And that's exactly what I think we have to do. We simply have to take the one state that exists, that Israel created, and turn it into a state of all its inhabitants. Now here, there's a little bit of a fly in the ointment here. Well, there's a couple issues that are very interesting, I think. One is our Palestinian partners that are mainly the left, the Palestinian left, that are represented largely by PINGO, which is the Palestinian NGO network, haven't moved to a one-state solution yet. I think for the Palestinians, it's very, and you guys correct, I don't want to represent Palestinians.
I was trying to,
I'm just trying to kind of lay this out, and that is that I think for Palestinians, especially of an older generation, to make the transition from a national liberation struggle, where you're really struggling for self-determination, for a state for the last 100 years, to a civil rights movement, where now you're locked in a state, in a way, with your oppressors, the Israelis. It'll never be a Palestinian state. And I think this is one of the big issues, and that is that that state would have to be binational. In other words, we can't pretend that this is Kansas and that everybody's just a voter. There's two national movements here, two peoples. Whether there should have been or not, that's another issue. And I think the whole issue of what happened in '48 and all the crimes of Zionism and everything is bracketed. It's not forgotten, but I think we have to deal with that after we get to a political solution. We can't deal with that at this. So I think the problem for the Palestinians is that once they accept the idea not only of a democratic state, but of a binational state, a state in which there are two peoples living here, and there has to be an acknowledgement of that. That's very hard. That smacks of soft Zionism. They're really saying, what are you expecting us to legitimize the Zionist movement by acknowledging Israelis as a people, as a national group? And I think that that's one of the problems that exists in this formulation. So I'll just say that part, and then you guys can. The other, and I think that's one reason why we're having trouble moving towards a one-state solution, because I think the Palestinians themselves are in a transition, and it hasn't completely, what that means hasn't been completely fleshed out. Plus, of course, the fact that, in my view, this anti-normalization thing is a real problem, because it prevents us from strategizing. I can't talk to my Palestinian partners anymore. We're good friends. We have coffee. We do things together in Geneva, or we do things together in other places. But here, there's no communication whatsoever between us. And this is exactly the time when I really do think the PA is starting to collapse. And I think the whole occupation is getting more and more unsustainable, that we have to be talking about where are we going. And that conversation is not happening. That's one problem. The second problem is the governments. We're in a bad marriage. We can't nail this down without governments. And I'll give you just a very graphic example. I was in the foreign ministry in Norway, maybe 6 months ago. Norway is, super human rightsy. Norway, of course, is very critical of Israel's occupation. The Norwegian government divested all its state pensions and teachers' pensions and so on from Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli military company. They're good. So I'm sitting in the foreign ministry with the Middle East people, and they said to me, we can only accept the two-state solution. That's as far as we can go. So I said to them, look, let's say you, the Norwegian government, comes to the conclusion that the two-state solution is gone. If there's another, Israel builds an E1 or annexes Area C, whatever else has to happen. If you haven't, the Norwegian government, decide the two-state solution is over. What would you do? Where would you go? And the answer was, we couldn't go anywhere. Because as critical as we are of the occupation, Israel itself is a friendly country to Norway. It's a partner. We do trade with Israel. We like Israel. We would never do anything to harm Israel. So all we would do, if the two-state solution is gone, is we would increase our humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. That's as far as we can go. So we're stuck also in terms of once we formulate what we mean by if we're going to a one-state solution, to a just solution and so on, we have to figure out a strategy of how do we now, and the Palestinians are exhausted. I don't know if they have the strength to do this, but now we have to really think of how do we get governments. I mean, governments, it's not hard to sign them on to the idea the irony is in Europe now they're voting to recognize a Palestinian state. It's like 5 years too late. And the problem with that, of course, is that they're locking the Palestinians into a solution that's gone. So when the Palestinians start to move to a one-state solution, the Europeans are going to say, hey, but look, you asked us to adopt the two-state solution, and we did. Now what do you want us to do? Change our minds? You know, so they're locking the Palestinians into a two-state solution. And of course, those resolutions have good intentions, but they're not really recognizing sovereignty in Palestine. It's like you recognize a Palestinian state, but what about the occupation? Does that stay in the... It doesn't go that far. So what I'm saying then is, I think it's clear where we have to go, in my view, towards a one-state solution that's democratic, but that recognizes the collective rights of everybody here. And I have all kinds of, I won't get into it now, but a whole model of how that could be, how you could do binational and democratic. It's possible to do. And the fancy word in academia is a consociational state, a state of sharing rather than competition like you have in Lebanon. So there's models out there. I think we have to begin to, we, civil society, we the people have to start taking the initiative and formulating the alternatives. Governments aren't going to do it. And if we don't talk to each other, which we don't, then we're really stuck. That's one thing. And then the second is, of course, to take that idea, our plan of a solution, and then begin to develop strategies to really influence the policy of the international community. That seems to me the agenda, and we're not really moving, we're moving towards it incrementally, but not in a fast enough, I think, and not in a strategic way enough.